First class? Seriously? They're letting him sit here? They laughed when the single father settled into the wide leather seat beside his daughter. The kind of laugh people don't bother hiding because they assume it's justified. A man across the aisle muttered something about points abuse, while another whispered loudly enough to carry, "Crew should double-check that boarding pass." By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And stay with me, because what happens on this flight will turn ridicule into stunned silence faster than anyone on board could imagine. The father didn't argue, didn't glare, didn't even flinch. He simply helped his daughter lift her small backpack into the overhead bin, adjusted the air nozzle toward her seat, and asked if she was warm enough. From the outside, he looked exactly like what they assumed, a tired parent in practical clothes that didn't belong among tailored jackets and quiet luxury, watches. But beneath the surface, something about him refused to bend under their judgment. And before this flight reached its destination, the same cabin that laughed would listen in absolute stillness. Rowan Hale moved with a steadiness that came from long practice, the kind learned in places where panic only made things worse. He fastened Aaliyah's seatbelt, tugged once to test it, then gave a small nod as if confirming a private checklist. "You comfortable?" he asked softly. She grinned, eyes wide, as she traced the stitching on the armrest. "Dad, this seat is bigger than our couch." He chuckled under his breath. "Don't get used to it." Across the aisle, Leonard Quince watched the exchange with poorly disguised amusement. His cufflinks caught the overhead light each time he shifted, tiny mirrors announcing wealth without a word. "First time up here?" Leonard asked, the question coded in casual cruelty. Rowan glanced over, polite but unreadable. "Something like that." "Well," Leonard smirked, swirling the amber liquid already delivered to his seat. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Aaliyah looked between them, confusion flickering across her face. Not yet old enough to decode social hierarchies, but old enough to feel when a tone sharpened. Rowan leaned closer to her. "Hey, remember what we talked about?" She nodded immediately. "Focus on what matters." "Exactly." Outside the oval window, ground crews moved in orchestrated patterns beneath the wing. Rowan watched them longer than most passengers ever would, not idly, but attentively, eyes following the fuel hose disconnect, the slow roll of a service cart, the rhythm of flashing safety lights. Habits didn't disappear just because a life changed. The senior flight attendant approached, her posture effortless, voice warm. "Welcome aboard. Can I offer you something before departure?" "Just water for now," Rowan replied. Aaliyah hesitated, then whispered, "Do they have hot chocolate?" The attendant smiled. "We absolutely do." As she stepped away, Leonard leaned toward the passenger beside him. "Hot chocolate in first class. That's new." A few quiet laughs followed. Rowan heard them. Of course he did, but he was somewhere else for a moment, not in this cabin, not under these reading lights. He was remembering a different flight years ago, one taken in silence, except for the steady breathing of the woman beside him. A hospital transfer. No laughter then, only machines. He blinked once, grounding himself. Aaliyah tapped his arm. "Are you nervous?" "About flying?" he asked. She shook her head. "About my interview." He smiled, the expression gentler than anything the surrounding passengers had bothered to notice. "Kiddo, you built a working weather station out of spare parts. They'd be lucky to have you." She leaned into him slightly, reassured. The cabin doors closed with a thick, mechanical finality. A distant whine rose beneath the floor as the aircraft awakened, systems humming to life in layered tones most people never consciously registered. Rowan did, his head tilted almost imperceptibly. Not concern, recognition. He scanned the ceiling panels, the lighting strips, the subtle delay before one section brightened fully. Interesting. Leonard noticed the movement and chuckled. Relax. Planes make noises. Perfectly safe. I know, Rowan answered calmly. The engines deepened into a low vibration you could feel more than hear, like the purr of some enormous animal preparing to move. Elia pressed her forehead to the window. We're really doing this. Yeah, he said quietly. We are. As the plane pushed back from the gate, sunlight slid across the cabin, glinting off polished surfaces. Watches, glasses, rings, small monuments to status. Rowan's hands rested loosely on his knees, but his gaze kept drifting, listening, measuring, cataloging without effort. Always position the single dad where power never looks. Seat 2. A wasn't supposed to hold someone like him, and yet, as the aircraft turned toward the runway, a faint flicker rippled through the overhead lights. So quick most passengers missed it entirely. Most. Rowan's eyes narrowed just slightly. The plane paused. Engines roared. Acceleration pressed everyone gently into their seats. Leonard lifted his drink with a satisfied sigh. Elia grabbed her father's hand, excitement sparking through her nerves. Rowan squeezed back, steady as bedrock, but his attention lingered upward, counting silently. 1 beat, 2, then normal again. For now, and somewhere far ahead, beyond the laughter and the altitude yet to come, a moment was already forming. One that would carry a captain's voice through this very cabin, rewriting every assumption made at 30,000 feet. The engines leveled into a steady thunder as the aircraft climbed, the city shrinking into a patchwork of light beneath them. Rowan kept his gaze upward for another moment, replaying the flicker in his head like a technician scrubbing through footage frame by frame. Probably nothing. Still, patterns mattered. Elia tugged gently at his sleeve. Dad, my ears popped. He smiled faintly. Swallow, or yawn if you can. She exaggerated a yawn, then giggled. The sound drew a glance from Leonard, who seemed personally offended by any joy not curated within his circle. Some people treat first class like a theme park, Leonard muttered to the woman beside him. Rowan ignored it, reaching into the seat pocket for the safety card. Not to study the cartoon diagrams, he already knew them by memory, but because holding it steadied the instinct rising inside him. Across the aisle, Leonard leaned forward again. So, business or pleasure? Rowan looked over. Trip for my daughter. Oh, Leonard raised a brow. Quite the upgrade for a kid's trip. She earned it. Leonard smiled thinly. Did she? Elia straightened. I built a climate model that predicts microstorm patterns. The woman next to Leonard blinked, surprised. Leonard merely chuckled. Well, that's adorable. Rowan's voice remained calm. It is. A soft chime echoed through the cabin as the seatbelt sign switched off. Almost immediately, the choreography of first class resumed. Trays unfolding, glasses clinking, low conversations flowing like curated background music. The senior flight attendant returned, balancing a tray with practiced grace. Hot chocolate for you, she said, placing it carefully before Elia. Thank you, Elia beamed. And for you, she asked Rowan. Still water is perfect. As she poured, her eyes flicked briefly toward the ceiling panels, then back to him. Had she noticed it too? He considered asking, but no, one data point wasn't a pattern yet. Leonard swirled his drink again. You know, he said, conversationally, most people work years to sit up here. Loyalty tiers, corporate contracts. It's a system. Rowan met his gaze evenly. Systems are important. They keep standards intact. Sometimes, Rowan replied. The woman beside Leonard shifted uncomfortably, sensing the current beneath the words. To break the tension, Aaliyah whispered, Dad, how does the plane know where to go? He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial softness. Multiple navigation layers, GPS, inertial reference systems, backups for the backups. Her eyes widened. So it can't get lost? Not easily, Leonard gave a short laugh. Listen to that confidence. Rowan didn't react, but inside, something older stirred. A reflex forged in briefing rooms, where arrogance often preceded mistakes. The plane cruised smoothly now, sunlight stretching long across the cabin. Yet beneath the sensory calm, Rowan tracked the aircraft the way some people tracked, weather, through vibration, tone, rhythm. Then he heard it, not a sound exactly, more a hesitation within the electrical hum. A fraction of a second where the frequency dipped before stabilizing. He stilled. Aaliyah noticed immediately. What? Probably nothing, he said gently, but he counted anyway. 5 minutes later, the overhead reading light across the aisle blinked, once, then returned to steady brightness. Leonard frowned. Cheap wiring on a billion-dollar jet. Impressive. A businessman behind them chuckled. I'm sure it's fine. Rowan watched the panel without turning his head. Delay interval slightly shorter this time. Interesting. The attendant passed again, collecting empty glasses. Rowan spoke quietly. Ma'am, quick question. She paused. Of course. Have there been any recent electrical updates on this aircraft? Her brows lifted. Not that I'm aware of. Why do you ask? Just noticing a small lighting irregularity. Could be nothing. Professional composure held, but curiosity sparked behind her eyes. I'll mention it to the cockpit. No urgency, he added. Leonard snorted. Planning to audit the plane mid-flight? Rowan returned his attention to Elia. Kiddo, drink your cocoa before it cools. Leonard leaned back, shaking his head. Confidence is remarkable these days. The attendant moved forward, thoughtful now. Elia studied her father. You always notice things. He smiled faintly. Used to be my job. Why'd you stop? The question hovered between them. Innocent, heavy. He glanced out the window where clouds stretched like quiet continents. Sometimes life asked you to fly a different route. She seemed to accept that, curling her legs beneath the blanket. Minutes passed. The aircraft shifted slightly, a gentle correction. Then, flicker. Longer. A few passengers looked up this time. Leonard lowered his glass slowly. All right. That one I saw. Rowan inhaled once, deeply, mapping the sequence in his mind. Not random, never random. From the galley came the muted ring of an interphone, followed by hushed movement. The attendant returned toward the cockpit with more purpose now. Aaliyah whispered, Dad, is something wrong? He covered her small hand with his, warm, steady. Airplanes are designed to handle surprises, he said. It was true, but surprises still needed interpretation. The engines droned on, indifferent to human tension. Around them, conversations resumed. Thinner now, threaded with awareness. Leonard tried to laugh it off. Imagine worrying about a light bulb. Rowan didn't bother answering, because beneath the polished calm of first class, A quiet equation was forming, inputs aligning, signals repeating, and instincts he hadn't used in years were waking, piece by deliberate piece. Somewhere ahead of the cabin door, pilots studied their displays. Somewhere inside Rowan's mind, an old, training voice whispered, "Pay attention early, or pay dearly later." He leaned back slowly, eyes lifting once more toward the ceiling, listening not just with his ears, but with the part of him that had learned long ago that machines always spoke. You just had to know when they were trying to warn you. If you're drawn to stories where quiet strength overturns loud judgment, subscribe now. Because what unfolds on this flight will challenge everything these passengers thought they understood about power. Another faint dip in the hum brushed past. Rowan closed his eyes briefly, counting again. The pattern was tightening. The pattern was tightening. Rowan opened his eyes slowly, letting the layered hum of the aircraft settle into something he could mentally dissect. Most passengers heard noise. He heard structure, electrical load balancing, environmental systems cycling, the distant hydraulic undertone that rode beneath everything like a hidden current. Then came another flicker, short, sharp, gone. Across the aisle, Leonard stopped mid-sip. Even the woman beside him looked up this time, her forehead creasing. "All right," Leonard muttered. "Twice is coincidence. 3 times is maintenance getting fired." Rowan said nothing, but his pulse had shifted into that quiet, focused rhythm he remembered from long nights inside aircraft bays, when the difference between assumption and evidence could cost lives. Elia leaned closer. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "The listening without moving." He almost smiled. "Am I that obvious?" "Only to me." He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Everything still feels normal, kiddo. That's important." She nodded, trusting him completely. A trust that landed heavier than any responsibility he'd carried before. From the galley came the faint murmur of 2 attendants speaking low. One of them, Mara, stepped into the aisle, her professional composure, intact but sharpened now with awareness. As she passed Rowan, her gaze met his for half a second longer than courtesy required. A silent question. He gave the smallest nod. She continued forward toward the cockpit. Leonard caught the exchange immediately. "Don't tell me you've got the crew chasing ghosts." Rowan kept his tone even. "Just sharing an observation." "Based on what? Intuition?" "Experience." Leonard smirked. "Everyone's an expert at 30,000 feet. Rowan returned his attention to the cabin ceiling, letting the remark dissolve without resistance. Arguing with arrogance was like shouting into headwind, exhausting and pointless. Instead, he counted seconds, measured intervals, waited. A businessman 2 rows back called for another drink, his voice slightly louder than before. The subconscious human attempt to restore normalcy through routine. Glasses clinked again, but the ease hadn't returned. Up front, the cockpit door opened, briefly. Mara spoke to someone inside, then accepted a tablet before stepping back into the galley. Her movements remained controlled, yet there was a precision now, the kind crews used when deciding how much concern passengers were allowed to see. Elia watched her go. "Are they worried?" "They're attentive," Rowan corrected gently. He felt the next flicker before he saw it, a microscopic dip in the cabin's electrical presence, like a breath drawn and released too quickly. This time, several passengers noticed. A ripple passed through the cabin, subtle but unmistakable. Leonard shifted in his seat. "Okay, I officially don't like that. Rowan leaned toward the aisle. When Mara returned, he spoke quietly. Did the cockpit confirm anything? She lowered her voice. They're reviewing a minor advisory, nothing operational. Intermittent bus reading? He asked. Her brows lifted slightly. That specific? Just a possibility. She studied him now, curiosity overtaking skepticism. You work in aviation? Used to. Before she could ask more, Elia looked up brightly. My dad helped design safety systems, she said. Rowan exhaled softly. Elia, what? You did? Mara blinked once, recalibrating. That explains your terminology. Leonard leaned across the aisle. Wait, you're serious? Rowan met Mara's gaze. I don't want to overstep, but if it is a bus fluctuation, automation sometimes misreads the redundancy loop. It can create cascading advisories that look worse than they are. She absorbed that, professional instincts sorting signal from speculation. I'll pass it along, she said. Thank you. As she disappeared forward again, Leonard let out a short laugh, thinner now. So, what were you, an airplane mechanic? Something like that? Funny, Leonard said, adjusting his cuff. You don't look retired. I'm not. Then why leave? Rowan glanced at Elia, who was now sketching cloud shapes on a napkin. Priorities changed. Leonard followed the look, then leaned back, oddly quieter. The plane shifted altitude slightly, engines deepening before smoothing again. Rowan listened harder. There, a fractional delay between system transitions, not dangerous yet, but structured enough to demand attention. Inside the cockpit, pilots were almost certainly parsing the same puzzle now. Modern aircraft were resilient by design, layered with protections that bordered on obsessive. But interpretation still mattered, and misinterpretation could multiply workload at exactly the wrong moment. Elia nudged him. Are you scared? He shook his head. No, are you? She considered it, then shook hers too. Because you're not. The simplicity of that faith struck deeper than turbulence ever could. Another chime sounded, not the seatbelt sign, just a quiet systems tone from somewhere forward. Mara returned again, slower this time. Captain says thank you for the insight, she murmured. They're running a comparison now. Rowan inclined his head. Happy to help if needed. Leonard stared openly now. You weren't bluffing. Rowan didn't answer. Outside, the sun dipped behind a bank of clouds, the cabin light softening into muted gold. For a moment, everything seemed almost peaceful again. Then the overhead panel flickered longer than before, long enough that conversation stopped entirely. Silence pooled between the seats. Leonard whispered, That one felt different. Rowan's jaw tightened just slightly, because it had been different, not random, sequential. He felt it with absolute clarity now. The old mental grid snapping into place, every anomaly connecting like stars forming a constellation. Whatever this was, it was repeating, and repetition meant the aircraft was trying to say something. Rowan leaned back slowly, eyes fixed upward, mind already stepping several moves ahead. The pattern wasn't just tightening anymore. It was announcing itself. The pattern wasn't just tightening anymore. It was announcing itself. Rowan kept his eyes on the overhead panel, tracking the faint afterimage of the flicker, like a musician listening for the wrong note in a familiar song. Around him, the cabin had gone quieter than before. Not silent, but restrained, as if conversation itself might provoke whatever lived inside the wiring. Leonard cleared his throat. Tell me that was still nothing, Rowan answered calmly. It's something worth understanding. That's not comforting. Comfort and safety aren't always the same thing. Leonard shifted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Unbelievable. I fly twice a week, and the one time I get a philosopher engineer. Former, Rowan corrected gently. Former engineer beside me, Leonard continued. The plane starts blinking. Elia frowned. Planes, don't blink, Rowan almost smiled. Good catch. From the galley, the low hum of the interphone sounded again, sharper this time. Mara stepped out, posture straight, but no longer effortless. She moved quickly toward the cockpit, accepting a headset from another attendant before disappearing through the reinforced door. Passengers noticed. A businessman lowered his laptop lid. Someone removed their headphones. The invisible membrane of denial had thinned. Rowan leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. He wasn't tense. Tension clouded judgment. Instead, he felt the steady clarity that used to arrive whenever systems began speaking in patterns rather than noise. Elia watched him carefully. You're counting again? Yes. What number? Intervals, he said softly. Not numbers. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. Across the aisle, Leonard exhaled loudly. If this turns into one of those stories where we land in Kansas unexpectedly, I'm suing someone. Rowan glanced at him. Aircraft are built with extraordinary redundancy. Even when something misbehaves, there are layers prepared for it. You sound very certain. I respect engineering. Before Leonard could reply, the aircraft gave a subtle shudder. Not turbulence exactly, more like a muscular adjustment deep within the structure. A few passengers gripped their armrests. The seatbelt sign chimed on. That changed the air immediately. Mara returned down the aisle, voice warm but firmer now. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has asked that everyone remain seated while we pass through a brief systems check. There is no cause for concern. The phrasing was careful. Rowan recognized it instantly, reassurance without specifics. Leonard leaned closer. Systems check? That's new. Rowan's gaze lifted again. There. Another dip in electrical tone, synchronized this time with the environmental fans modulating overhead. Not lighting, alone. Load redistribution. His thoughts moved faster now, assembling possibilities, sensor disagreement, automated protection logic, perhaps a generator channel reporting inconsistent data. Elia whispered, Dad. He covered her hand with his. I'm right here. Her fingers relaxed almost immediately. That, more than anything, anchored him. The cockpit door opened again. Mara stepped halfway into the galley, speaking quietly into the interphone. Her eyes flicked toward Rowan once, not seeking answers yet, but acknowledging a shared awareness. Leonard followed the look. You've got their attention, he said. That's not what I want. Then what do you want? Rowan didn't hesitate. Clarity. Minutes stretched. The engines droned on, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, clouds thickened into towering white walls, sunlight scattering across them in blinding brilliance. Inside, tension condensed into something almost tangible. Then the lights flickered. Again. Longer. A collective inhale swept the cabin. Someone muttered a prayer. The businessman behind them asked an attendant, Should we be worried? Her smile never faltered. Everything remains under control, sir. Rowan listened harder. There, a fractional lag before the auxiliary systems compensated. He leaned into the aisle as Mara approached once more. Is the cockpit seeing generator variants? He asked quietly. She paused. They are evaluating a channel inconsistency. So, not imagining it. If it helps, he said, equally low, intermittent sensor disagreement can trigger protective automation. Sometimes isolating the affected bus prevents escalation. Her eyes sharpened with professional focus. You're very specific. I've seen similar behavior before. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once and moved forward again. Leonard stared openly now. You talk like you're still on the payroll. Rowan leaned back, folding his hands loosely. Old habits. Let me guess, Leonard said, skepticism softening into curiosity. Air Force? Rowan didn't answer immediately. Outside the window, a thin contrail stretched past like chalk across blue glass. Finally, he said, Long time ago. Leonard let out a low whistle. And now you're, what, flying coach most days with the rest of us mortals? Most days, Rowan said evenly. I'm exactly where I need to be. Aaliyah squeezed his arm, proud, without fully knowing why. Another quiet chime sounded from the front. Then, unexpectedly, the engine pitch shifted, subtle but perceptible to anyone paying attention. The aircraft wasn't losing power. It was adjusting. Rowan felt certainty settle deeper. The crew was managing something real now, not dangerous yet, but no longer theoretical. He closed his eyes briefly, mapping the architecture from memory. Parallel electrical channels, automatic load-shedding thresholds, cross-tie, relays waiting silently to redistribute power. Beautiful systems, when interpreted correctly. Leonard swallowed. You don't look scared. Rowan opened his eyes. Fear is useful only if it sharpens you. And if it doesn't, then it just spreads. For the first time since boarding, Leonard fell completely silent. Up front, Mara reappeared, slower now, deliberate. And this time, she stopped beside Rowan's seat. Her voice was almost a whisper. The captain would like to know, if you're willing, whether you might share exactly what you're noticing. Rowan held her gaze for a long second. Then he nodded once, because the aircraft wasn't just speaking anymore. It was asking to be understood. Because the aircraft wasn't just speaking anymore. It was asking to be understood. Rowan nodded once, the movement small but decisive. Mara exhaled almost imperceptibly, as if that quiet agreement alone shifted some invisible weight. I can't bring you into the cockpit, she said softly, professionalism threading every word. But the captain would appreciate anything you're comfortable sharing. Of course, Rowan replied. Leonard leaned forward immediately. You're actually consulting them, mid-flight? Rowan didn't turn. I'm answering a question. Aaliyah looked between them, eyes wide but steady. Dad, are you fixing the plane? He shook his head gently. The crew fixes planes. I just help them see things. Mara crouched slightly so their conversation remained private. What exactly caught your attention? She asked. The lighting flicker was the first clue, he said. But it isn't just lights. There's a fractional delay in environmental compensation. Fans adjusting half a beat late. That usually means the electrical load is redistributing unexpectedly. She listened with complete focus now. Generator issue? Possibly, or a sensor disagreement making the system think there is one. And that's dangerous? Not inherently, Rowan said calmly. Modern aircraft are built to tolerate failures. The risk comes from confusion when automation reacts to faulty data. Another soft tremor passed through the floor, subtle enough most would miss it. Rowan didn't. Did the cockpit mention advisory codes? He asked. They referenced fluctuating readings on one channel. He nodded slowly. Then it may help to isolate that bus early before protective logic starts shedding non-critical systems unnecessarily. Mara absorbed this, then straightened. I'll relay it exactly. As she moved forward, Leonard let out a long breath. Well, this is officially the strangest flight I've taken. Rowan leaned back, but his senses stayed sharpened. Across the cabin, conversations had dropped to murmurs. Humans were excellent at pretending calm, yet the body always betrayed awareness. Tighter shoulders, slower gestures, glances that lingered toward the ceiling. Elia traced circles on the armrest. Are we safe? Yes, he said, without hesitation, and he meant it. So far, the aircraft felt structurally strong. Engine smooth, flight path steady. Whatever anomaly lived inside the electrical architecture hadn't breached the layers designed to contain it, but containment depended on interpretation. Minutes later, Mara returned, quicker this time. The captain says your description aligns with what they're seeing. Rowan inclined his head. Good. She'd like to know if you've encountered this before. On retrofit platforms, he answered. Older redundancy logic sometimes overcorrects when sensors drift. It can look like cascading failure when it's really just disagreement. Leonard blinked. You're talking like someone who wrote the manual. Rowan ignored him. Mara studied Rowan another moment, then asked quietly, would you be willing to share your background with the captain? He hesitated, not from reluctance, but from an old instinct that preferred anonymity. Yet this wasn't about him. Former Air Force avionics engineer, he said, later worked on commercial transition safety teams. Mara's eyes widened a fraction before training smoothed her expression. I'll let her know. As she disappeared again, Leonard stared openly. You weren't exaggerating. I wasn't advertising. Elia tilted her head. Why didn't you tell me you worked on planes like this? He smiled faintly. You were too busy building weather stations. She grinned at that, then grew serious again. Another flicker rippled overhead, longer now. This time, a soft gasp traveled through first class. The seatbelt sign chimed again, though it had never been turned off. Somewhere behind them, a glass rattled against a tray. Leonard whispered, Okay, I officially regret the champagne. Rowan closed his eyes briefly, listening, deeper than sound, feeling the aircraft's electrical rhythm through the seat frame, through the air itself. There, the delay had lengthened. Automation was compensating more aggressively now. When he opened his eyes, Myra was already returning, and she didn't stop at the galley this time. She came straight to him. The captain says thank you, she murmured. They've isolated the suspected channel and are monitoring the response. Rowan exhaled slowly. Good crew, decisive. Are the readings stabilizing? He asked. Improving, she said. But they'd appreciate it if you stayed available. Of course. Leonard let out a shaky laugh. Stay available. Listen to that. You're practically crew now. Rowan finally looked at him. Everyone on board is invested in the same outcome. Leonard nodded once, arrogance thinning into something more human. Outside, the clouds had thickened into towering formations, sunlight fractured into silver halos. Inside, the aircraft seemed to breathe easier. The overhead lights held steady. Environmental fans returned to their usual rhythm. Rowan allowed himself the smallest release of tension. Not solved, but contained. Elia leaned against his shoulder. I knew you'd understand it. He kissed the top of her head. Understanding is step 1. And step 2? Let the professionals do their work. At that moment, the intercom chimed. Not an announcement, just a cockpit call routing through the attendants. Mara listened, then met Rowan's gaze again. The captain says the anomaly is no longer escalating. Leonard sagged into his seat. Best sentence I've heard all year. Rowan didn't celebrate, because patterns didn't vanish. They resolved, or they evolved. Still, the aircraft felt balanced again, like a tightrope walker regaining center. If you've ever wondered what quiet expertise looks like when it meets real pressure, subscribe now, because the moment. This cabin hears the captain's voice. Everything these passengers believed will shift at once. Rowan rested his head back, eyes drifting upward one more time. For now, the machine was silent. But he knew better than most. Silence wasn't proof of absence. Sometimes it was simply the pause before recognition. Sometimes it was simply the pause before recognition. Rowan kept listening anyway. The overhead panels glowed steady now, their soft amber wash returning the cabin to something that resembled normalcy. Around him, tension loosened by cautious degrees, shoulders lowering, breaths deepening, conversations restarting in careful fragments as if passengers feared calm might shatter if handled too abruptly. Leonard rolled his neck once and exhaled. Well, looks like you scared the problem away. Problems don't scare, Rowan replied quietly. They either resolve or wait. That's not remotely comforting, Elia nudged him. Does that mean it could come back? He chose his answer with care. It means good crews stay ready. From the galley came the muted rhythm of service resuming. Ice settling into glasses, cutlery aligning on trays. The choreography felt practiced, almost defiant, like normalcy being restored by deliberate force. Mara approached again, though this time her smile carried genuine warmth. The captain asked me to tell you the electrical channel stabilized after isolation, she said. No further anomalies so far. That's encouraging, Rowan answered. Her eyes lingered. She also wanted me to confirm something. You mentioned retrofit architectures earlier? Yes. You helped design them? Some safety redundancies during transition programs, he said, tone understated. Leonard blinked hard. You designed parts of these systems? Helped improve them, Rowan corrected. Elia beamed quietly beside him, pride radiating without restraint. Mara tilted her head, slightly. The captain said to tell you, she appreciates the precision of your observations. Rowan inclined his head once. Praise had never mattered much to him. Outcomes did. A gentle vibration passed through the floor as the aircraft adjusted altitude again, smoother this time. The engines hummed with renewed confidence, their tone settling into a clean, uninterrupted resonance. For the first time in nearly half an hour, Rowan allowed his muscles to unclench. Not entirely, never entirely. Leonard lifted his glass, studying Rowan over the rim. You know what's funny? When you boarded, I thought you were someone who lucked into the wrong seat. Rowan gave a faint smile. Seats don't define capability. Leonard let out a short breath. Clearly. Across the aisle, the woman who had been silent most of the flight leaned forward. Were you really Air Force? Years ago. What made you leave? She asked gently. He glanced at Elia before answering. Life rearranged itself. Understanding softened her expression immediately. The plane drifted through a stretch of cloud, sunlight dissolving into pale gray. Moisture streaked briefly across the window before vanishing behind them. Elia traced the fading droplets, It looks like we're underwater." "In a way," Rowan said, "just sky instead of sea." A soft chuckle escaped her. Then, almost too subtle to notice, a single overhead light blinked. Rowan's attention snapped upward. Leonard saw it too. "Tell me I imagine that." Rowan didn't respond immediately. He counted, waited, 5 seconds, 10. No follow-up flicker. Interesting. Mara noticed his focus and stepped closer again. "Did you see something?" "One light," he said. "But no environmental delay this time." "So, unrelated?" "Possibly residual calibration after the isolation," he said. "Systems sometimes need time to fully settle." She nodded slowly, filing the iwi explanation away. Behind them, a passenger laughed, too loudly, the brittle kind of laughter that insisted everything was fine. Rowan listened deeper. The aircraft felt balanced. No hidden lag in the fans. No micro dip beneath the electrical hum. Whatever disagreement had lived inside the system appeared contained within the rerouted architecture. Mara's interphone chimed again. She listened, then smiled faintly. "The captain confirms all readings are now within expected ranges." Leonard clapped once against his knee. "Best news at altitude." Rowan allowed himself a small exhale. Aaliyah leaned against him. "So you helped?" "The crew solved it," he said. "I just shared perspective." She studied him carefully. "You always say that when you do something big." He didn't argue. Outside, the cloud layer thinned, revealing a brilliant sweep of blue. Sunlight flooded the cabin again, turning every polished surface into a quiet mirror. For a moment, the earlier tension felt almost imagined. Almost. Leonard shifted toward Rowan, voice lower now. "I owe you an apology." Rowan glanced over. "I judged you," Leonard admitted. "Figured you were out of place." Rowan held his gaze without accusation. "We all make fast assessments." "Still," Leonard said, rubbing his jaw, "not my finest moment." Elia whispered loudly enough for both men to hear. "Dad says mistakes matter less if you learn fast." Leonard huffed a laugh. "Your daughter's wiser than most executives I know." Rowan smiled faintly. Up front, the cockpit door opened briefly. Mara stepped inside, not with urgency this time, but with the measured ease of routine communication. When she emerged, something had changed. Not tension, anticipation. She paused beside Rowan once more. "The captain asked me to let you know. She'd like to address the cabin shortly." Leonard straightened. "Address us about what?" Mara's smile deepened, just a fraction. "About professionalism and gratitude." Rowan felt a quiet resistance rise inside him. Public attention had never been his language. He preferred shadows, systems, quiet fixes no one noticed, but some moments didn't ask permission. Elia squeezed his hand. "Are they going to say your name?" "I hope not," he murmured. Above them, the speakers crackled softly. Not yet an announcement, just the circuitry awakening. Passengers glanced upward in unison. A hush began to spread, instinctive and electric. Rowan rested back against the seat, gaze steady, heart calm. He had spent years ensuring aircraft spoke clearly when something went wrong. Now, at 30,000 feet, it seemed the aircraft and its captain were preparing to speak for him. He had spent years ensuring aircraft spoke clearly when something went wrong. Now, at 30,000 feet, it seemed the aircraft and its captain were preparing to speak for him. The overhead speakers crackled once, then settled into silence again, like a throat being cleared before words formed. Around the cabin, conversations tapered off mid-sentence. Even the low clink of glassware seemed to pause in anticipation. Leonard leaned toward Rowan, voice barely above a whisper. "You're about to get famous on a plane." "That's not a goal," Rowan replied evenly. Elia tilted her head back to stare at the speaker panel. "Do they always announce things like this?" "Usually for weather or arrival updates," he said. "But not for people?" "Not often." The intercom clicked again, but still no voice followed. A strange stillness spread, the kind that made every small sound sharper. A page turning, a seatbelt shifting, someone exhaling through their nose. Then Mara appeared once more, though she didn't immediately approach Rowan. Instead, she spoke quietly to another attendant, both of them nodding with subtle professionalism before continuing their duties, as if nothing unusual hovered in the air. Rowan noticed the choreography. The captain wasn't rushing. She was choosing her moment. Leonard ran a hand through his hair. "You know what this reminds me of? Board meetings right before a CEO drops unexpected news." Rowan allowed a faint smile. "Hopefully with less turbulence." The aircraft drifted gently through a pocket of thin cloud, sunlight diffusing into a soft glow that made the cabin feel suspended between worlds, neither fully grounded nor entirely untethered. Elia leaned against him again. "Your heart beats slower than mine." "That's because you're excited." "I'm not excited," she insisted. "I'm alert." He chuckled quietly. "Good word." Across the aisle, Leonard shifted forward, elbows on his knees now, curiosity overriding whatever arrogance had boarded with him hours earlier. "You really helped them figure it out?" "I offered context," Rowan said. "Same difference at 30,000 feet. Before Rowan could answer, Mara finally approached. Her posture carried a different energy now. Less inquiry, more certainty. "The captain wants you to know the system has remained stable since the reroute," she said softly. "No additional advisories." "That's excellent," Rowan replied. "She also asked me to confirm how you recognize the pattern so quickly." He considered the question. "Electrical systems behave like conversations," he said. "When two components disagree, you hear hesitation, delays, compensations. Once you've listened long enough, you don't forget the sound." Mara studied him with open respect. "She said you described the issue faster than the diagnostic summary populated." Leonard let out a low whistle. Elia blinked. "Dad, is that rare?" "Timing matters in complex systems," Rowan answered gently. Mara hesitated, then added, "The captain also mentioned something else. She reviewed your background through the credential you provided." Rowan felt a quiet flicker of reluctance. Not fear, just the old instinct to remain unremarkable. "And?" he asked. "She said your work influenced safety protocols still used today." Leonard stared outright now. "You're kidding." Rowan said nothing. Because the past wasn't something he carried for applause. It was simply part of the road that led him here. A sudden soft chime echoed through the cabin. Every head lifted. This time, the intercom followed immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice flowed through the speakers, calm, grounded, unmistakably in command. A hush fell so complete it felt almost physical. "This is your captain speaking." Leonard froze, eyes wide. The woman across the aisle set down her glass without a sound. Elia gripped Rowan's hand. "We experienced a minor electrical advisory earlier in the flight," the captain continued, her tone measured but reassuring. "Out of an abundance of caution, we isolated the affected channel and monitored system response." Rowan listened not just to the words, but to the cadence, professional transparency balanced with confidence. Exactly right. I want to emphasize, she went on, that the aircraft remained fully safe and operational at all times. A collective breath released across the cabin. Then came a pause. Not accidental. Intentional. Rowan felt it before she spoke again. And I would like to extend my personal gratitude to a passenger on board, a former Air Force avionics engineer, whose insight helped our crew interpret the anomaly quickly and accurately. Leonard turned so fast his seatbelt creaked. Passengers began glancing around, searching. Rowan remained still. Heat crept up the back of his neck. Unfamiliar, unwanted. Mara's gaze settled gently on him, confirmation without spectacle. The captain continued, voice warm now. Sir, your professionalism reflects the very spirit aviation is built upon. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you. Silence followed. Not awkward, reverent. Then, slowly, understanding rippled outward like circles across water. Eyes landed on Rowan. Leonard's mouth parted slightly. The businessman behind them whispered, "That's him." Elia looked up at her father, awe bright in her expression. "You didn't tell me it was that big." He squeezed her hand once. "I didn't know it would be." For a moment, no one spoke. The earlier laughter felt impossibly distant, like something that belonged to a different flight entirely. Leonard swallowed. "Well, I'll never look at seat assignments the same way again." Rowan exhaled quietly, grounding himself in the steady vibration beneath his feet. Recognition wasn't why he'd spoken. But if it shifted even one assumption in this cabin, perhaps it mattered. Outside, the clouds parted into endless blue. Inside, respect settled where judgment once lived, and Rowan understood something with quiet certainty. Sometimes the strongest reversals didn't arrive with drama, just a voice over an intercom, and the truth finally heard. Just a voice over an intercom, and the truth finally heard. For a heartbeat, the cabin remained suspended in that fragile quiet, the kind that follows revelation. Then the spell broke. A man 2 rows ahead began clapping. It was hesitant at first, almost unsure of its own permission. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, the sound spread through first class in a rising wave of applause that seemed far too large for the narrow aisle meant to contain it. Rowan stiffened slightly. He had never learned what to do with public gratitude. Elia, however, beamed. "They're clapping for you," she whispered, eyes shining. "For the crew," he corrected gently. Leonard shook his head. "No, that announcement was personal." The woman across the aisle leaned forward. "Sir, thank you, truly." Rowan inclined his head once, polite but restrained. "I'm glad everything stabilized." The applause softened, fading into murmurs, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where curiosity once lingered, respect now settled with quiet permanence. Mara passed again, this time unable to hide her smile. "The captain meant every word," she said softly. "She doesn't single people out lightly." Rowan nodded. "She handled it perfectly. She also asked me to tell you the rerouted bus has held without fluctuation." "Good redundancy design," he replied. Leonard chuckled under his breath. "Imagine complimenting the plane you helped save." Rowan didn't bother correcting the exaggeration. Elia tugged his sleeve. "Does this mean you're famous now?" He smiled, faintly. "Fame is just attention with poor memory." She wrinkled her nose. "That sounds like something you practice saying." "Maybe." Across the aisle, Leonard shifted, his earlier confidence replaced by thoughtful humility. I owe you more than an apology, he said quietly. I built an entire story about you before you even sat down. Rowan met his gaze calmly. Most people do. It's efficient. That doesn't make it right. No, Rowan agreed, but recognizing it, that matters. Leonard exhaled slowly, absorbing the grace in that response. Outside the window, sunlight stretched endlessly across the wing, the metal surface gleaming with serene indifference, as if unaware of the drama it had quietly carried. The seatbelt sign chimed off again. This time, no one questioned it. Normalcy returned, but it felt upgraded somehow, recalibrated by what had just unfolded. A flight attendant approached with renewed service. Compliments from the captain, she said, setting down a small dessert plate before Aaliyah. For our youngest engineer. Aaliyah gasped softly. Dad, look, Rowan chuckled. Careful, they'll recruit you. Early, Leonard leaned over. At this rate, she'll be flying the plane before she's 16. She already understands weather patterns better than I did at her age, Rowan said. Aaliyah flushed with pride. The woman across the aisle smiled warmly. You must be very proud, he didn't hesitate. Every day. For a moment, Rowan allowed himself to simply sit, not analyzing, not anticipating, just present beside the person who had quietly become the center of his entire orbit. Then the interphone chimed again, softer this time. Mara listened, nodded, and approached. The captain would like to invite you to visit the cockpit after landing, she said. Rowan blinked once, surprised despite himself. That's generous. She believes gratitude should be expressed face to face. Leonard let out a low whistle. That's basically the aviation version of a standing ovation. Rowan glanced toward the forward cabin door, imagining the instruments glowing. Beyond it, the layered architecture he knew almost by heart. Strange, how a world once so familiar now existed mostly in memory. Elia squeezed his arm. Can I come too? I suspect that can be arranged, Mara said with a smile. As she stepped away, Leonard leaned closer. You know, I spend my life evaluating people in seconds. It's part of business. But today, he shook his head. Today recalibrated something. Rowan considered that word. Recalibration. Systems and people weren't so different. Both drifted without periodic correction. If moments like this remind you that real strength is often quiet, subscribe now, because what happens after this landing will prove that dignity echoes far beyond a single flight. A gentle turbulence brushed the aircraft, nothing more than a passing ripple. No one startled this time. Trust had replaced suspicion. Rowan closed his eyes briefly, listening again out of habit. The electrical hum flowed clean, balanced, resolved. Leonard studied him. You're still checking, aren't you? Always. Even when it's over? He opened his eyes. Especially then. Aaliyah rested her head against his shoulder, already drifting toward sleep, the excitement finally giving way to exhaustion. Rowan adjusted the blanket around her with careful hands. For years he had measured success in system integrity, mission completion, silent precision. Now he measured it differently, in moments like this, when the future beside him slept peacefully at altitude. The cabin lights warmed toward afternoon tones as the aircraft continued its steady path across open sky. No flickers, no delays, just the quiet confidence of a machine understood. And somewhere ahead, a runway waited, along with the final proof that respect, once earned in truth, never needed to announce itself again. And somewhere ahead, a runway waited, along with the final proof that respect, once earned in truth, never needed to announce itself again. The aircraft cruised with quiet confidence now, the earlier tension dissolving into the steady rhythm of long-haul flight. Sunlight slanted through the windows at a lower angle, warmer, signaling the slow passage of hours, even though time inside the cabin felt suspended. Elia slept deeply against Rowan's shoulder, her breathing soft and even. He adjusted slightly so her neck wouldn't tilt, holding still despite the growing stiffness in his arm. Discomfort was irrelevant. Peace beside him mattered more. Across the aisle, Leonard watched the scene with a softened expression. "She trusts you completely," he said quietly. Rowan nodded once. "Trust is built in small moments." Leonard folded his hands together. "You know, when the captain spoke, it hit me how quickly assumptions collapse when confronted with competence." Rowan glanced toward the window. "Assumptions are efficient. Truth takes longer." Leonard gave a thoughtful hum. "In my world, speed is everything. We evaluate people in seconds, decide whether they belong in the room. And today, Leonard admitted, I realized how often we mistake polish for capability." Rowan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The cabin lights shifted subtly as attendants prepared for the descent phase still some time away. A faint aroma of reheated bread drifted from the galley, mingling with coffee. Ordinary sensory details that felt oddly profound after what the flight had carried. Mara approached again, her steps unhurried. "We've begun coordinating arrival timing," she said softly, careful not to wake Elia. "The captain asked me to reassure you everything remains perfectly stable." "I never doubted the crew," Rowan replied. She studied the sleeping child, her smile gentling. "You handled all of this with remarkable calm." "Calm spreads," he said. "So does panic." Leonard nodded immediately. "I can attest to that. Watching you, it kept the rest of us from spiraling." Rowan almost laughed at that, the idea that his stillness had influenced strangers. Yet he knew it was true. Humans mirrored emotional cues whether they realized it or not. Outside, the wing cut cleanly through a pale ocean of cloud. The engines maintained their deep, reassuring resonance, a sound Rowan had once associated with duty, and now associated with continuity. Elia stirred, blinking awake. "Did I miss anything?" "Just clouds," he whispered. She stretched, then looked around, noticing the occasional glance still drifting toward them. "They're still staring." "Curiosity fades," he said gently. "Give it time." Leonard chuckled. "Not all of us. Some of us are rethinking entire personality traits." She smiled shyly at him, then leaned toward her father. "Will the captain really let us see the cockpit?" "So it seems." Her eyes lit again. "Best flight ever." Rowan felt warmth rise, quietly, in his chest. Years ago, flights had been missions, timelines, checklists, contingencies layered upon contingencies. Now this one would become something else entirely in her memory. The day she saw what quiet expertise looked like. A chime sounded softly overhead, not urgent, just operational. Mara glanced toward the forward cabin, then back at Rowan. "We'll begin our initial descent in about 40 minutes. Leonard rubbed his palms together. "Never thought I'd be this eager to land just so I can shake someone's hand." Rowan tilted his head. "You don't have to." "I know," Leonard said. "That's why I want to." The woman across the aisle leaned in as well. "My husband's an engineer. He always says the best ones are invisible until something goes wrong." Rowan smiled faintly. "Good engineering should feel boring." She laughed softly. After today, I appreciate boring more than ever. The aircraft banked slightly, sunlight sliding, across the cabin in a slow golden sweep. Somewhere below, landscapes passed unseen, rivers threading through cities, highways glinting like wires. Rowan listened once more out of habit, still balanced, still clean, but he knew something others did not. Safety wasn't a static condition. It was an ongoing conversation between design, human judgment, and vigilance. Leonard leaned closer again. Can I ask you something? Off the record? Go ahead. When you heard that first flicker, were you scared? Rowan considered it. No, he said finally. Fear comes when you don't understand what you're facing. Recognition replaces it. Leonard sat back slowly. Recognition, I like that. Elliot traced a finger along the window. It's getting darker. We're changing angle with the sun, Rowan explained. For a while, none of them spoke. The quiet felt companionable now, rather than strained. Then Mara returned once more, this time holding a small, folded card. The captain asked me to give you this before we begin descent. Rowan accepted it, unfolding the thick paper. A handwritten note. Your insight made a difference today. I look forward to thanking you in person. Captain Adrian Voss. He read it twice, something unexpectedly emotional stirring beneath his steady exterior. Not pride, something deeper. Acknowledgement from a professional peer. The rarest currency he knew. Elia peeked over his arm. What does it say? That we'll be visiting the cockpit, he said softly. Leonard smiled. Frame that card. Rowan slid it carefully into his pocket instead. Outside, the aircraft began its gradual descent, the engines adjusting pitch with smooth precision. Passengers shifted, sensing the transition, tray tables lifting, seats straightening, routines reassembling for arrival. Rowan rested his hand lightly over Elia's. Ahead lay a runway, a meeting, and the quiet closing of a circle he hadn't expected to revisit, because sometimes the past didn't disappear. It simply waited at 30,000 feet for the right moment to find you again. Because sometimes the past didn't disappear. It simply waited at 30,000 feet for the right moment to find you again. The aircraft angled gently downward, the subtle shift in gravity pressing ever so slightly against Rowan's chest. Engines softened into a lower register as thrust adjusted for descent, the sound familiar enough to stir something old inside him. Not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. Aaliyah watched the wing tilt against a canvas of fading gold sky. It feels different. We're descending, he said quietly. Air gets thicker. Engines don't have to work as hard. She nodded, absorbing the explanation with the calm focus she always carried when learning something new. Across the aisle, Leonard tightened his seatbelt with unnecessary precision. Funny, he muttered. I fly constantly, yet I've never actually thought about what the plane is doing. Most people don't need to, Rowan replied. But you always do. Yes. The cabin lights brightened slightly as attendants prepared the interior for arrival. A familiar efficiency returned. Trays secured, seats checked, soft reminders delivered with professional warmth. Yet beneath the routine, something else lingered. Awareness. Passengers still glanced toward Rowan now and then, not intrusively, but with the quiet regard reserved for someone who had crossed an invisible threshold from stranger to protector. Mara approached once more, her expression composed but brighter than before. We've started our final descent, she said. The captain also asked me to remind you that you and your daughter should remain seated after arrival. Elia perked instantly. Cockpit? Mara smiled. Cockpit. Leonard shook his head. I'm going to feel very ordinary walking off this plane when gave a faint smile. Ordinary keeps the world running. Outside, the clouds thinned into scattered wisps, revealing the distant geometry of land below. Highways threading through neighborhoods, water reflecting the last stretch of sunlight. The aircraft banked again, smoother than breath. Rowan listened automatically. No electrical hesitation, no irregular modulation. Just the layered harmony of a machine performing exactly as designed. Still, habit kept him attentive. Systems could be stable and still demand respect. Elia nudged him. Are you checking again? Always on the way down, he said. Why? Because transitions matter most. Leonard let out a soft laugh. That applies to more than airplanes. Rowan didn't disagree. A gentle tremor rippled through the fuselage. Not turbulence, just the aerodynamic conversation between aircraft and thickening air. Passengers shifted, some peering out windows, others powering on phones prematurely despite the still-lit sign. Mara's voice carried from a few rows back, polite but firm. Devices must remain in airplane mode until we're at the gate. The woman across the aisle leaned forward. Will you go back to aviation after this? Rowan considered the question longer than expected. No, he said finally. Not even after today? He glanced at Elia. My flight path changed. She smiled at that, leaning into him. Leonard studied him carefully. Walking away from expertise like yours, that couldn't have been easy. It wasn't about easy. Then what? Rowan's gaze rested on the horizon, where amber light dissolved into deepening blue. Some responsibilities outrank ambition. Leonard nodded slowly, understanding more than Rowan suspected. The intercom chimed again, this time the standard pre-landing announcement. Captain Adrian Voss's voice filled the cabin once more, calm and precise as she outlined weather conditions, arrival time, and the request for passengers to remain seated until the aircraft reached the gate. Professional, measured. Yet Rowan noticed something subtle. The warmth threaded beneath her cadence when she thanked everyone for their patience earlier in the flight. A leader who understood that trust was part of safety. The runway appeared moments later, thin as a graphite line far below. Elia pressed closer to the window. I see it. Good eyes. The landing gear deployed with a distant mechanical thud, followed by the soft roar of air resistance increasing. Flaps extended gradually, altering the wing shape with elegant inevitability. Leonard gripped his armrest, not from fear, but anticipation. You know, he said, I'll never hear that sound the same way again. Rowan allowed himself the smallest smile. The ground rose steadily to meet them. Seconds stretched, then a firm but graceful touchdown. Rubber-kissed asphalt with a muted chirp before the engines reversed, A-B. Powerful rushing sound filling the cabin as the aircraft decelerated. No applause this time, just a collective exhale, the quiet satisfaction of a journey completed without incident. Rowan felt it too, not relief exactly, completion. As the plane slowed and turned toward the taxiway, late sunlight poured across the cabin, bathing everything in gold. Faces, seats, even Leonard's once imposing cufflinks now glowing with softer humility. Well, Leonard said quietly, safest flight I've ever taken, and the only one where I knew why. Rowan glanced toward the cockpit door ahead. Soon he would step through it again, not as crew, not as engineer, but as a guest invited back into a world he had once inhabited completely. Strange how life circled. The aircraft rolled smoothly toward the gate, engines lowering into a gentle hum. Passengers gathered their things prematurely, as always, yet many paused to offer Rowan a nod or grateful glance while passing his row. No grand gestures, just respect. Elia squeezed his hand. I can't wait, he squeezed back. Neither could he, though for reasons she could not yet fully understand. Because sometimes closure didn't come from leaving a life behind. Sometimes it arrived quietly, right at the gate you thought you'd never see again. Because sometimes closure didn't come from leaving a life behind. Sometimes it arrived quietly, right at the gate you thought you'd never see again. The aircraft slowed to a crawl as it aligned with the jet bridge, engines settling into a subdued hum that felt almost reflective after hours of layered sound. Outside the window, ground crew vehicles moved with deliberate choreography, fluorescent vests glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. Inside, the familiar impatience of arrival stirred. Overhead bins clicking open prematurely, seatbelts unfastening despite the still-lit sign. Rowan remained seated. Elia practically vibrated beside him. Are we really staying? We are, he said, smiling faintly. Leonard stood halfway, then paused when he noticed Rowan hadn't moved. Oh, right, he said, sitting back down. VIP privileges. Not VIP, Rowan replied. Just invited. The seatbelt sign finally chimed off. Passengers rose in a slow wave, retrieving bags and smoothing jackets, but many hesitated as they passed Rowan's row. A businessman stopped briefly. Thank you again. Rowan inclined his head. The woman across the aisle touched her heart lightly before stepping into the aisle. Small gestures, quiet acknowledgments, exactly the kind he preferred. Soon the cabin thinned, voices fading down the jet bridge until only a handful of passengers remained. Mara approached, her smile relaxed now that operational pressures had fully dissolved. The captain asked that you come forward whenever you're ready, she said. Elia shot to her feet, then froze, suddenly shy. Rowan stood more slowly, retrieving their bag before placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Ready, engineer? She nodded. Leonard lingered nearby, clearly debating whether to intrude. Finally, he extended his hand. I'd regret it if I didn't say this properly, he said. You changed how I see people, and maybe how I lead them. Rowan accepted the handshake, firm, uncomplicated. Leadership improves when curiosity replaces certainty, he said. Leonard smiled. I'll remember that. Then, surprising himself, he added quietly, if you ever need anything, professionally or otherwise, I hope you'll reach out. Rowan recognized the sincerity and nodded once. Safe travels, Leonard. As Leonard disappeared down the jet bridge, Rowan turned toward the forward cabin. Each step carried an odd familiarity, the narrow aisle, the subtle scent of avionics warmed by hours of operation, the quiet authority emanating from the closed cockpit door. Mara knocked gently. A voice answered from within. Come in. The reinforced door swung open, revealing a space Rowan had once known as intimately as his own reflection. Panels glowed softly. Switches rested in disciplined rows. Screens displayed navigation data with serene precision. And standing between the seats was Captain Adrian Voss. She removed her headset as they entered, her expression composed yet unmistakably warm. So, she said, extending her hand, it's an honor to finally meet you. Rowan shook it. Her grip was confident. the grip of someone accustomed to responsibility. "The honor is mine, Captain. You ran a beautiful operation." She smiled at the phrasing. "Old language, I like it." Her gaze shifted to Elia. "And this must be the future engineer." Elia straightened. "Yes, ma'am." Captain Voss gestured toward the jump seat. "Would you like to see where we fly from?" Elia's eyes widened as she climbed carefully into place, taking in the constellation of instruments. Rowan watched her, something deep inside him settling in a way he hadn't anticipated. Captain Voss lowered her voice slightly. "Your analysis saved us valuable time. We were seconds away from running a more disruptive diagnostic path." "You would have resolved it," Rowan said. "Eventually," she agreed, "but efficiency matters in the air." She studied him thoughtfully. "When I read your credential, I recognized your name. Your redundancy work is still referenced in transition training." Rowan blinked once, genuinely surprised. "I didn't realize it endured." "Good design endures," she said simply. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside the windshield, ground crew signaled methodically, a silent ballet Rowan remembered well. "Why did you leave?" she asked gently. He glanced at Elia, now peppering the first officer with questions about altitude and weather patterns. "My wife passed," he said. "There are moments when your child needs you more than the sky does." Captain Voss nodded slowly, understanding settling without intrusion. "Aviation lost something when you stepped away," she said. Rowan shook his head. "It gained thousands who stayed." She regarded him with quiet respect. "Still," she said, reaching into a side pocket, "I'd like you to have this." She handed him a small metal wing pin, not ceremonial, but authentic, worn smooth at the edges. "A spare from my first command," she explained. "Consider it a token, from one professional to another." Rowan accepted it carefully, emotion flickering beneath his composure. "Thank you," he said. Behind him, Elia whispered in awe, "Dad, look at all this." He smiled softly. Captain Voss added, "If you ever decide the sky is calling again, there will always be a place for minds like yours." Rowan closed his fingers around the wings, feeling their weight. "I think," he said quietly, "the sky found me exactly where I was meant to be today." She followed his gaze to Elia and smiled. "Yes," she said, "I believe it did." And in that cockpit, surrounded by instruments, memory, and forward motion, Rowan understood something with perfect clarity. He hadn't left aviation behind. He had simply carried its discipline into a different kind of flight. He had simply carried aviation's discipline into a different kind of flight. For a moment longer, Rowan stood inside the cockpit, the quiet hum of powered-down systems wrapping the space in a calm that felt almost sacred. The glow from the displays softened as post-flight procedures continued, and beyond the windshield, the airport stretched wide, taxi lights blinking awake as dusk edged closer. Elia turned slowly in the jump seat, trying to absorb everything at once. "It smells different up here," she whispered. Captain Adrian Voss smiled. "That's the scent of electronics and long journeys." Rowan recognized it instantly. Warm circuitry, conditioned air, faint traces of hydraulic fluid. For years it had meant purpose. Now it felt like a memory greeting him with gentle familiarity. The first officer pointed out the primary flight display to Elia, explaining altitude tapes and navigation markers. She listened with complete absorption, the way only children could when the world suddenly opened wider than they imagined. Rowan watched her, something deep inside him settling into place. "You raised her well," Captain Voss said quietly beside him. I try, he answered. She asked questions the entire time we taxied, the first officer added with a grin. Good questions. Aaliyah beamed. Captain Voss folded her arms loosely, studying Rowan with thoughtful calm. You know, most passengers would have panicked at the first flicker. Some would have demanded explanations. You listened. Listening reveals more than reacting, he said. She nodded. That composure influenced my crew more than you realize. Calm is contagious in the air. Rowan considered that. He had never thought of his stillness as leadership, only necessity. Outside, a baggage cart rattled past, its metallic clatter echoing faintly through the fuselage. Dad, Aaliyah said, holding the wing pin he'd shown her moments earlier. Does this mean you're still part pilot? He smiled softly. It means I was part of something important, and still am, in a way. Captain Voss added gently, Aviation isn't just a career, it's a mindset. Once learned, it never leaves you. Rowan slipped the pin into his jacket pocket again, feeling its quiet weight. For years after his wife's passing, he had wondered whether stepping away meant abandoning a calling. Standing here now, he understood something differently. Purpose didn't vanish when paths changed. It evolved. Will you ever come back? Captain Voss asked. He glanced at Elia. I never left what mattered, he said. The captain followed his gaze and smiled. Fair answer. They stepped out of the cockpit together, the empty forward cabin stretching behind them in gentle silence. Cleaning crews would arrive soon. Another flight would take this aircraft into another sky. Movement never stopped. At the door, Mara waited with a warmth that had long since replaced her earlier professionalism. Travel safely, she said. And thank you again, not just for the technical help, but for the calm you gave everyone. Rowan inclined his head. You all handled it beautifully. Elia waved enthusiastically. Bye. As they crossed the jet bridge, the evening air drifted toward them, cooler, touched with the scent of rain somewhere far off. Passengers clustered ahead in the terminal, yet when Rowan emerged, several recognized him immediately. A few offered nods. One man lifted his carry-on slightly in a quiet salute. No applause, no spectacle, just respect, the kind that settles deeply because it was earned, without seeking it. Leonard stood near the exit corridor, clearly waiting. I was hoping I'd catch you, he said. I meant what I said earlier. Today reminded me that leadership isn't about occupying the biggest seat. It's about being the person others rely on when things tilt. Rowan extended his hand once more. Then the lesson traveled well. Leonard smiled. It did. After he disappeared into the flow of travelers, Rowan and Elia stepped into the wider terminal. The ceiling arched high above them, announcements echoing softly, rolling suitcases forming a steady percussion beneath it all. Elia slipped her hand into his. Dad? Yes? When the captain thanked you, I felt like everyone saw you the way I do. He blinked once, emotion catching him off guard. And how is that? She squeezed his fingers, like someone who always knows what to do. He crouched slightly so their eyes met. Kiddo, no one always knows. The goal is to stay calm enough to figure it out. She considered that seriously, then nodded. They resumed walking, their reflections gliding across the polished floor. Somewhere behind them, the aircraft that had carried their story prepared for its next journey. Somewhere ahead waited her interview, her future, 1,000 moments yet unwritten. Rowan felt no need for recognition now. The reversal had already happened, not just in the cabin, but in the quiet shift of perception that traveled outward with every passenger who had witnessed it. Sometimes dignity didn't roar. Sometimes it simply stood its ground until the world caught up. Before you go, tell me your next story title. I might pick it for our upcoming episode. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. They mocked the janitor at the tech conference until the keynote speaker called him Professor. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?